Maryam Namazie is our very special guest. Thank you for coming, all of you, but especially Maryam.
Thank you.
The Rationalizer is probably playing Skyrim. I don't know where he is. Anyway, William Lane... Oh, also, we were going to have another very special guest, William Lane Craig, but I didn't invite him, and he didn't show up. Anyway, if you would like to appear on the panel for any questions, comments, criticisms, or discussion issues, our focus is on the Middle East and Islam, Islamic history, culture, lore, and so forth. Just send a Skype invite or a friend request to The Gin and Tonic Show. Please do not call into the show, or you will be blocked because it disrupts the show. Send us the friend request, and then when we're ready to accept you as a guest, we will bring you in. If you've already sent a friend request, or if you're about to, make sure that you include a few lines about who you are, how you'd like to be introduced, and what you'd like to discuss. All guests are advised that they should minimize and mute their blog TV, otherwise you will see and hear everything on a delay, and you will hear it twice, which will disorient you. Also, all guests are informed ahead of time that this is broadcast live on Blog TV and is recorded later for upload on YouTube. Okay, so, first order of business. Syria has been suspended from the Arab League. Thoughts?
Absolutely right.
Hassan, anything?
Absolutely right. Yeah, correct. Well done. I mean, what's going on there is absolutely outrageous. I mean, the killing of civilians, innocent people, detainees being sent back to their family, chopped up with their heads chopped off, and God knows what. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I think that this should have been done a long time ago.
You know, a couple of people have complained that the show gets too political. What do you, Kling or Hassan? It's too bad Rash isn't here because he was one of the founders of the show. It was his and Klingschor's idea. What do you think about how political versus religious you think the focus of the show should be? I think that at this point in history, it would be very difficult not to make a show that just becomes intertwined with political issues and current events.
I think as long as you maintain a balance, it should be fine.
Yeah.
As to Syria and this, what is it, the Arab League?
Yes.
Is Saudi Arabia part of the Arab League?
Yes, I believe so.
So, okay. So, I mean, I don't. All right. So I'm ignorant. I'm completely ignorant of the geopolitics of the region and the actual law systems of the region. So I've only got a very rudimentary knowledge of it all. But are you telling me that a country that is the government that is chopping up people now is being kicked out of the Arab League, but a country that chops up people for punishments in law, beheading people, stoning people, that country is still part of the Arab League? Why is there such a discrepancy? What's the difference?
Well, I think go ahead.
There's a word called hypocrisy. I mean, the Arab League are a bunch of hypocrites, and all the Arab governments are all a bunch of hypocrites. That's quite simply that's the answer.
So is it simply the PR?
And I also, I mean, sorry, can I just jump in? Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I think the thing is too that one of the things we mustn't forget, even though obviously they all violate rights and so on and so forth, the fact that Syria has been kicked off has a lot to say about the people's protest in that country, and it reaching a point where it's actually forcing governments to turn their backs on their closest friend and ally just a few days ago. And so in that sense, I think if we see it in that context, it's not about the governments and their hypocrisy and their rights violations, but about people's protest that's taking place, that's forcing governments to take action against Syria. So from that sense, I think it's an important move.
Absolutely. They wouldn't have done anything if there wasn't such huge protests, if there wasn't such huge outcry in the West. They couldn't care less. If it was all quiet and Assad was doing it in a very subtle way that wasn't reaching the press, they wouldn't give a damn. But as you say, as Maryam says, their hand has been forced.
We did the first episode, the pilot episode of this show. We did a simple tech demonstration that turned into a miniature show because Muslims called in and wanted to discuss. And we had one guest from Jordan who was saying that he both supported the royal family in Jordan and hoped that they survived. And I wonder to what degree Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the other states are simply minimizing the damage to themselves and sort of cutting off an infected limb by kicking Syria out.
To be fair, Jordan is a little bit of a different kettle of fish. It's not quite as bad. I mean, they're all bad, but there are degrees. You know, Jordan is probably one of the countries where there are, you know, comparatively speaking, it's not as bad as what's going on in Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the other countries.
Discussing normative Islamic practice is that there is a spectrum, and what happens is apologists will often look at the bright spots in some of the more cosmopolitan and liberal areas, which admittedly there are. You know, I've like Tunis and Beirut and so forth. There's some relatively progressive areas, and then of course we, you know, often find ourselves you know, shocked and horrified by things that are happening at the opposite end of the spectrum. But some of you know, the worst areas, often the rural areas, or some of the areas where the human rights the human rights picture is much worse, or the local clerics are much more conservative and have much more power. So there's this constant tug of war where, you know, each side of the debate wants to focus more on one side than the other. Although in our case, I think it's a bit justified, because it's not that we're pretending that the worst of the worst are all that exists. It's just obviously the squeaky wheel should get the grease.
I mean, from my perspective, I think that, you know, if there are examples where things are better, it's not because of Islam and religion per se, it's because of, you know, people's movements and, you know, social movements that have taken place in the countries that are better, or, you know, have better laws, for example, resistance that's taken place. It's not because Islam is good and there are good applications of it and bad applications of it. I think like any religion, if you look at it and go back to the basics, you see that, you know, it's books that are relevant. I don't even know if they were very relevant for centuries ago, and they are homophobic, misogynist. They just have no respect for humanity. And so in that sense, I think apologists of Islam will often show some good examples, but actually a lot of those examples are despite religion, in spite of religion, and as a result of resisting against religion, rather than it being bright spots in Islam itself. And I guess that's why, in a sense, when you talk about you know, the Middle East or Islam in particular, you're forced to go into politics. You know, you mentioned earlier about the fact that it seems that these discussions get too mixed in with politics, because in a sense, Islam is very much mixed in with politics as a result of the rise of the Islamic movement, the political Islamic movement. And so, I mean, I always give this comparison where it's like, you know, Christianity during the Inquisition. It's very different to Christianity today, and in that sense, that's why when we talk about Islam, it is very much linked with politics. But I think if you look at any situation where it's bad, it's Islam, and where it's good, in my opinion, it's because people have resisted it. And I don't know, it always annoys me that the good bits are often, you know, credited. Islam or even Islamic states are credited for the good bits that take place, whereas in fact there's all this resistance taking place and all this suppression of that resistance that's been pushed back for those bright spots to actually be there and to happen.
You focus a bit on Iran, and especially you're from Iran. I think that's a classic example, perhaps the shining example of how society at large manages to be more and more progressive despite the not just the foot dragging, but the outright knuckle dragging of its government.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, you know, how in Iran there's these various factions within the government, the conservative faction, the reformist faction, everybody's heard about them. I mean, oftentimes the reformist faction is credited for the situation in Iran, the improvements and so on and so forth. And actually, if you look at it, there are no real improvements in the sense that Sharia law is still there, stonings are still there, you know, amputations, eye for an eye retribution, all of it is still there. It's because people are resisting in a sense, and they're refusing to accept Islamic norms and traditions and rules, that it seems so progressive, you know, and to credit actually a faction of the regime for that, it just, I don't know, I find it despicable really, in the sense that they're responsible for, you know, the slaughter of an entire generation in that country, and, you know, violations that are just, it's impossible to even list what's happened there and what is happening there, and then to credit the oppressor for what people who are oppressed and resisting have done. Just, it's just, I find that quite outrageous in a sense. But as you said, people look at the situation in Iran and they say, well, look at, the fact that there are more women going to universities than men, the fact that, you find women are so outspoken and so much at the forefront of, for example, the protests that we saw after the fraudulent elections in 2009. And again, it goes back to the fact that the social movement in Iran is so strong and the protest movement in Iran is so strong. And actually there's an anti-Islamic backlash in Iran if you look at it carefully. And in a sense, that explains the infighting within the regime and the various factions. It's the explosive situation underneath. And to look at the infighting without seeing that is a very superficial look at the society and the battle that's really taking place. I think it's one of the key areas of the fight against Islamism in this era. And of course, with the Arab Spring and the fights that are taking place in other areas too, it has become a very global fight against Islamism and one that we really need to support.
Well, as we've noted on previous shows, I mean, religion drags behind society. So, when a society advances, the religion always, has to be dragged kicking and screaming along with it. So, I guess in the case of all these these regions of the Islamic world where there is progression, I would agree, it's in spite of the religion, because the religion follows the society. That's an interesting thought.
What do you think about?
I think, I'm sorry, just to say, religion doesn't change. It's the same tenets, the same principles. It's society that changes, and therefore, in order to keep up, you have religious leaders trying to speak the language of society in a sense. So you have, in a situation in, for example, Europe, where Christianity has been pushed back to some extent, you have them giving soup and, helping the homeless. But even then, gay people aren't allowed in their shelters and so on and so forth, even though it's a lot more subtle than, let's say, during the Inquisition. But, if you look at it that way, it's society that changes and pushes religion to a sense. But religion itself doesn't change. Sorry, yes, Hassan, you were saying.
That's what I said.
I was going to bring up the topic of Aliaa in Egypt. I had an exchange with Maryam about it. Of course, I definitely support, what she's doing. I don't know, do you know about this?
This is the naked blogger, isn't it?
Yeah, the naked blogger, yeah. Sometimes I think that we need to fight battles that we can win. And we need to bring along people who would support some of the things that we say and some of the things we want. I know what she's doing, and it's very, very brave of her, and I support her freedom and so on. But I don't know whether it's not the way I would have gone about it. Partly because I don't look as good as her, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I feel very strongly about what she's done, and I think we have to unequivocally defend her. Without any conditions, without any ifs and buts. I think that this is a 20-year-old woman. She's an atheist. She's a blogger who took photographs of herself nude as a protest and a scream against the misogyny and the sexism of Islamism. And I know there are people who are saying, well, it's not the right way of doing things, she shouldn't have taken her clothes off. But this is something they always say to all of us. They say to you, Hassan, they've said it to me. They're never satisfied with the way that criticism takes place because they don't want the criticism to take place in the first place. And in a sense, there are a lot of people who say calling yourselves ex-Muslims is provocative. There is provocation there, though, because when you are faced with a religious movement that is hanging people in city squares for apostasy, that actually stones women to death still in the 21st century, you have to provoke, you have to challenge it. And there are many different ways of doing it. Some people will take their clothes off, others will make a caricature and cartoon of Muhammad, and others will set up organizations like we have, the Council of Ex-Muslims. I think, in a sense, when people criticize the form that the criticism has taken, I say that that's really irrelevant. It doesn't matter if you like the form or not. And the example I often give is, what the woman who was raped was wearing is irrelevant. What the person who what crime the person committed who's on death row is irrelevant. That is, if you agree that execution and death penalty and rape are wrong in all instances. And I think in this case too, the form that people's freedom of expression takes is their right, and in a sense, we need to push boundaries, and that's really how things have changed throughout history. It hasn't been by being polite, by being reverent, and so on and so forth. It's actually by, breaking taboos, and kicking things that are sacred. And I think it's very important for us to do that in this day and age, and it's particularly important to defend people like Aliaa. I mean, for one, I think that there's a real question about her safety right now. Is she in hiding? What's happened to her? Because I just read that some Islamic students have filed a complaint against her in court and asked that she be tried according to Sharia law, and we know what that's going to mean. But I don't know if did you see what she's written on her blog about herself being naked? I wish I had printed it out here, but it's something to the effect of she's telling the Islamists that you hate the body so much. Why don't you burn I don't know, the statues of naked women and burn the art books, and why don't you look at your naked body in the mirror and burn yourself in order to get rid of all your complexities before you start telling me what to do with my body and how to express myself. And I think there's a lot of thought gone behind what she's done. If you read the things that she said, she's really brilliant. I think we have to support her no matter what, and particularly if there is a trial against her and if her life is in danger, we have to come out in full force to defend her.
Sure, there's no doubt about that. Yeah. No doubt about that. Yeah.
We have our first caller who's going to raise a question that people in the chat and on the contact list have been raving about, and that's Libya and whether it's a move towards or away from Islamism.
First of all, 4 weeks ago, I think it was, Hassan was supportive of the intervention in Libya. I looked into it, and I'm not sure, I'm sort of undecided on it. When I was looking at the casualties, NATO forces killed 1,100 people, and too many civilians were caught. I don't really know how shelling works. I don't know about the technology, but that just seems, it comes across as rather sloppy. It comes across like these people, when they were shelling, would have seen civilians there and just thought, oh, fuck it, we'll still get their forces. But anyway, either way, they killed 1,100 people. Now, how many people would have been spared, or how many people does that contrast to Gaddafi would have killed had he not been stopped?
I'd like to jump into this. I think that Gaddafi had already racked up numbers very similar to that. Gaddafi was using artillery and airstrikes against the unarmed protesters during its early phase, before the protesters even took up arms against him. So there are a lot of, I think, valid concerns and criticisms as to how this will play out now that what's been done has been done. But as far as the total body count is concerned, if it were to stop here and not devolve into civil war, then in my mind, there's no doubt that the body count would be lower overall for all parties concerned than if Gaddafi had been preceded with both a brutal putting down of the eastern cities and then the follow-up, which would have been, it was anticipated by many experts to have been like a Stalinist-type purge. It would have been bad.
Also, Gaddafi was deliberately targeting innocent civilians. The NATO forces were not. They were targeting Gaddafi's forces. There's an important difference there, I think. I mean, it's a tragedy that innocent civilians get killed, and that's inexcusable. But there is a difference there.
Maryam or Hassan?
Well, I just think it's a question of, can you just stand by when Gaddafi is brutally, violently suppressing protests of ordinary people. I think there's only one answer to that. You have to do something.
I mean, I had a friend in, well, an associate rather, in, let's see now, I think it was the capital. What's the capital called again of Tunisia?
Tripoli.
I've got a mental blank. Tripoli, right.
What, of Tunisia or Libya?
Libya.
Oh, no, Libya, sorry.
Libya,
God.
yeah.
I don't know if this is true, but she said that, because this was before the internet blackout occurred, she said that the militias had killed everyone at the hospitals. Did that actually happen? Is that true?
Cases of doctors who had treated both rebel and government forces being targeted and being whisked away or abused or killed.
Yeah, I think it's probably better that he's gone. I mean,
go ahead.
And so, as Hassan, I mean, there's two things I think that people are overlooking here. I mean, and Hassan has pointed this out in previous shows. First, I will point out one of them. First of all, if Libya becomes an Islamic state, the only people it's going to affect are the Libyans. It's not going to affect us. It's the only people who are actually going to get hurt are the Libyans. So I find it really bizarre because the people who are tend to be most concerned about this and promulgating this are anti-Muslim bigots. They say, "Oh no, the Arab Spring is just going to mean Islamic states." Why do you care? Because these people do not care about Muslims. All they care about is their own ideology. So I don't understand why that makes a difference to them, or why they even care. Because the only people who are going to get hurt, it's not going to be us. It's going to be it's going to be the Libyans. It's going to be the Arabs. It's going to be the natives who suffer. The second thing is that, I mean, if they want an Islamic state, I mean, as Hassan said, let them have it. Let them experience what it's like, and then they will be begging for democracy once they've experienced that form of governance.
Who is this aimed at, Kling?
Sorry, what did you say, Atheismo? Oh, sorry, 1 second, Maryam. I missed what you said.
Saying something about people who didn't really care or shouldn't have had an ostensible motive to care. What I'm asking is, who is this aimed at precisely?
Anti-Muslim bigots. I mean, just, the garden variety bigots you see on YouTube and on the internet saying, all Muslims, taqiyya, la 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 la, that kind of crap. They're the same people. They're predominantly the people I see saying that, the Arab Spring will lead to Islamic states. Primarily, they're the people, and I don't understand why they care, because they don't care about Muslims. They want to drive all Muslims out of their countries and back to the Islamic world. So I don't understand why they would care that they become Islamic states, because the only people who are really going to get hurt are the people living in the country, and I think that's bad. But I don't think that they really care.
Can I just clarify?
Maryam had something to say, and then we'll go to Hassan.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of points actually that you raised that I disagree with. I mean, I think that it's important always, in my opinion, to start from principle. What is important? We're not NATO forces, and we're not the Libyan government. What do we think as people is right and just? Thing, in a sense, to stop the killing of innocent people, but particularly given the history of U.S.-led militarism's intervention in the region, it's actually had a corresponding rise with the rise of Islamism, and I think the two actually do feed off of each other and support each other, and I can get into that a little later. But so in that sense, I think it's important to look at it from a matter of principle and how many lives we can save and what could be the good end results. But also, what happens in Libya is of our concern. It's not just, something that is of concern to Libyans or people who live in the region. And I think this is a problem in a sense because there's a far right that is racist and fascist and anti-Muslim and immigrant. It doesn't take responsibility off the shoulders of secularists and free thinkers and rationalists and atheists to stand up in solidarity with people in the region. So it's sort of like, I can be opposed to US-led militarism, and I'm also opposed to the Islamic Republic of Iran. It's not an either-or. My enemy's enemy is not necessarily my friend. And that's why I think, why should they care is not the first question that we should ask. Why should we care? And what can we do to support people in the region? Now, the thing is that if Islamism, takes over and takes hostage the Arab Spring, which was not about a demand for Islamism, that was not in the slogans, and Islamist organizations had very little they had no leadership positions in these protests to start with. There needs to be concern if these protests, which were for something very different, are hijacked by the Islamic movement. It should be a concern for all good people everywhere, not because you're anti-Muslim and racist, but in fact because you're pro people's rights and you want people to live free, equal and secular lives without having the sword of Islamism over their heads. So, I think there's a whole lot of issues that we can discuss more. But I think we also have to be careful that concern for the far right doesn't mean that we stop showing our solidarity and doing what's right.
Could I make a clarification? The point about the anti-Muslim bigots is that most of the people who say that the Arab Spring is going to lead to Islamic states are anti-Muslim bigots who do not actually care about Muslims. That was what I was saying about that. In regards to actual Libya and so forth, I do think it'd be terrible if Islamism took over. But my point is that if the majority of people want it, if it becomes a popular movement that takes over, any attempt on our part to try and force them out of it will only strengthen it. It'll make the perception. Look what's happened in Iraq. It'll simply, any attempts to forcibly to remove it will just garner more and more support for the movement Sure, sorry, go.
Can I just say that, first of all, it's not only anti-Muslim bigots that don't want Islamism.
No, I don't want Islamism either. I'm saying that in regards to Libya.
Right. For example, we've just started a campaign for free and secular Middle East and North Africa, and it's been initiated by a lot of women's rights and human rights campaigners in the region and those in exile outside, who are saying that a free and secular Middle East and North Africa is a precondition for any basic rights for women, men, children, and so on and so forth. So it's something that's also a demand of people of the region. It's like any society. You have your Tea Partiers, and you have people who are progressive and rationalists and whatever. There's a battle going on between these various social movements. Islamism is a far right movement, just like the European far right or the American far right, and so in a sense there is a lot of resistance against that too. And it's important for people who are against the far right in the West to also be against Islamism as another far right movement. The other issue is that if this whole argument of if the majority choose it, then it's fine, I think is a cop-out really, because the reality is that even in countries that have long histories of democracy, like in Britain, or let's say relatively long histories like the United States, people don't get what they want and what they deserve, because we know how elections work in a parliamentary democracy, let alone in a region that has been under the yoke of dictatorship and, where political parties have been banned for decades, where there's been no freedom of expression, and so on and so forth. Saying that they're just going to set up a ballot box and people are going to vote, and even if they vote for Islamism, that's what they want, is not necessarily the whole truth. And I think that in that sense, from my perspective, look, if every single person in the world wants Islamism, I will still stand alone and fight against it, because I know deep down in my gut that it's wrong, that it's a fascistic movement, that it's inhuman, that it reduces people to worse than animals. And so in that sense, that's why I think it's always important to start from principle first, what's right. We're not NATO, we're not the US government, we're not the Libyan government, we are people, and we have to start by what's better for people. And I think if it's better, it's good for us, it's generally good for a lot of people too. So in that sense, I think it's important not to just shrug our shoulders and say, well, they voted for it. Well, did they really? Did they really? I mean, that's a question I would always ask.
I take annotation because I feel like I haven't properly clarified.
No, I understand. I think I understood what you're saying. I too am really irritated when I hear either talking heads who will talking heads on the Muslim side of the fence who will support the most conservative to extreme interpretation anywhere and act as cheerleaders for these kind of people, and then their words could be taken verbatim from the mouths of right-wingers in the West, for example, who are actually, they seem like they're crossing their fingers. It's not garden variety cynicism. It's like they want the worst possible motive to validate their prejudice against people in North Africa. And it's really disheartening, and it'll be even worse. It'll be the salt in our injuries if things do in fact go that way.
But I take
can I come back?
I just want to quickly make this one addendum. I take umbrage to the cop-out. I mean, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if the majority choose Islamism, we cannot invade militarily. It's bad, and we should do everything we can. I'm not saying we shouldn't oppose it. Absolutely. But
it's not about invading, though. That's what I'm saying.
That was my point. That was my point. I
right.
wasn't saying
but that's what I'm saying. Why do you speak on as if you're a representative of the U.S. government? This is my issue.
I'm talking about NATO. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't.
I don't want to.
I understand what you. I agree. I agree with what you're saying.
I'm not personalizing the matter. It's not about you per se. It's a situation that I come up all the time, and it's frustrating. I don't speak as if I'm speaking on behalf of the Iranian government. Well, I think we should have nuclear weapons. No, I don't. I don't, because I speak. I'm part of people. I'm part of the 99%. Do you know what I mean? And in a sense, it seems that when we speak about the Middle East and North Africa, people take on the role of, their governments. In the sense that, well, I don't think we should invade. Well, you're not going to be invading. You are not going to be invading. The question is, as people, how can we intervene to defend? It's like the anti-apartheid movement, which I was involved with, showing solidarity with people's movements in those countries. It has nothing to do with governments. And in a sense, I think we need to be speaking on behalf of ourselves and showing solidarity with people everywhere, rather than taking on, the language and the things that governments use, basically.
So we were basically approaching the issue from two completely different angles, because I was actually looking at it from the NATO perspective. I was doing that on purpose. I was looking at it from how the government would respond in that instance. So, okay.
Can I?
Go, Hassan.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that my problem was with people who are saying that, you should leave people like Gaddafi in power, you should leave people like Mubarak in power, you should leave people like Ben Ali in power, you should leave these people in power, because at least they, sort of bring a certain amount of freedom and liberalism, and they stop the Islamists. They are a bulwark against the Islamists. These people who say that, or some of these people who say that, they don't give a damn about the people in these countries. They are only interested in their own interests. My perspective is that there was a natural uprising, the Arab Spring. I was in contact with people on Facebook telling me, to come to this demonstration in some square in Tunisia and so on and so on. And these were all secularists. They were all Ladiniin, people who didn't have any religion. They were all modern, educated young people. This was a movement that was naturally rising in this country, and so I felt straight away we have to support these people. Now I know that once you get rid of these Arab dictators who are unnaturally keeping an unnatural situation, you're going to get the Islamists coming to try and ride on their back and trying to take credit and so on. I realize that, and I realize that there's going to be a lot of difficulty. But what I'm saying is that we have to support, and it has to develop and evolve naturally, and we have to allow these people to evolve, and yeah, if there's going to be shit, if there's going to be difficulties, let it be, let it evolve naturally. What the Arab dictators have done for all these years is create an unnatural situation, and they've been supported by the West, they've been supported by America. Once this natural movement began to arise, then I had to support it.
Yeah, but also, can I just add, I mean, the thing is that Islamism, in a sense, it might try to hijack these movements, but no fight is predestined. Do you know what I mean? It depends on what we do and how what interventions take place. I mean, and what frustrates me and worries me is that there is, as Hassan said, this huge movement that has put dictators on the run, that is very, secular, very modern, and yet, you have the secularists in the West talking about, we need to respect the culture, and telling Aliaa she shouldn't be taking off her clothes, and telling Charlie Hebdo, the French publication that was firebombed, they shouldn't have done a caricature of Muhammad. So concerned about respect for culture and respect for religion, rather than actually showing respect for people and people's movements and showing solidarity with them. And that's why what worries me is that you have a situation where after dictatorships, it's easy for Islamists to rise because they are used to that sort of they bring dictatorships along with them. But if you want a truly free and democratic society, in a sense, it takes time for those forces to be able to build themselves because of the years of dictatorship and suppression. And if you don't have secularists, across the world helping and supporting, and if you leave them to their own devices and say, well, it's not our business, whatever happens, happens, what we're going to do is actually it's sort of willing the secularists to fail, but it's a fight, and we need to look at it as our fight as well, whether we live in the Middle East or North Africa or not, because the reality is that just like, you've got the far right is a global movement, it affects us everywhere. You have Sharia courts in Britain, you have, a rise in women being threatened if they're not wearing the burqa and the veil and so on and so forth. The world is very intertwined, and that's why we need seculars to really step in and really support the movements in that region. And what I worry about is that there's not enough support out there because of, the arguments from post-colonial guilt to, this effort to be seen to be separate from the far right, but you already are, because of the reason you're intervening and the way you're intervening, but or the whole left, the section of the left, and I'm on the left myself, but the section of the left that is so anti-US imperialism that any US imperialist enemy is seen as their friend, whereas that's not really the case. And I think that's why I think it's important to go back to principle, to what we think is right, and move from there. And I think we can make very few mistakes if we do that.
In the comment section, Stop Spamming One asked a very interesting question.
Wait, hold on, Kling. Oliver, our guest had a question, and we'll take more questions.
Okay, sure.
We have another caller waiting, and then questions from the chat will be dealt with. Oliver, go ahead.
So I'm not thrilled that we replaced the Gaddafi regime. We didn't like it because he killed people, and we've replaced it with a new regime that may very possibly kill people. And in the interim, we've seen black people getting persecuted, and we've seen beheadings. So that brings me on to the next question of, will it go down this road even more? With the announcement of Sharia law, the National Transitional Council government announced something along the lines of, anything non-Islamic is not welcome, and we will go by Sharia law. And a day later, or two later, he then said, oh no, don't worry, it won't be the extremist Sharia law, it'll just be a more moderate Sharia law. Where do you see the future of Libya going then? Can we expect to see gays and apostates and adulterers getting killed anytime soon, or will they indeed hold true to their words and be moderate? And I'll listen to the answer in on Blog TV. Thanks for having me.
I'll remove you the call. Thanks for calling in, Oliver. I think that in both appeals, any appeals that go to the local far right and the religious conservative elements on the ground in Libya, or whether they be appeals for moderates to liberals on the ground, or the international community, and to assuage the concerns of the international community, who's it's an interconnected world. It always has been. They can't, the last thing they want to do is to shoot themselves in the foot. Even if you have people on who are sincerely very conservative and religious, they still understand they're not stupid. Hopefully, they understand the importance of international relations. So I think that in both cases, a lot of it is playing to the crowd, and the best support and the most positive role I think we can play is just reminding them that we're watching, we're interested, and hopefully the chest beating that is taking place in these appeals to the most radical and sort of backwards interpretation of Islamic law will eventually die out a bit, and cooler heads will prevail.
Well, I think that we shouldn't be asking, well, will it go this way? I think, it could go this way, but it could also go a very different way, depending on the support that secularists have in Libya and in the region. I think, the whole concept of moderate Sharia law and extremist Sharia law is a sham and a farce for Western public opinion. There is no such thing, in my opinion. If you look at Britain, for example, where they have Sharia courts here, we're often told that the implementation of Sharia law in Britain is a moderate version of Sharia law. The only reason it's called moderate is because its civil code is being applied in the West rather than its criminal code. The criminal code is stonings, amputations, eye for an eye retribution, and so on and so forth. Whereas in the family code, it deals with issues of marriage, child custody, divorce, and so on and so forth. Now, I guess the question we ask is, why is it that when it comes to denying women's rights in the family, discriminating against women, discriminating against children, relegating women in particular to violent situations, that's moderate and not of concern, and as long as amputations aren't taking place, everything's fine and okay, and that's not the case. And I think using that term is a ploy. In my opinion, I think the U.S. government has no problem with Islamism, really. If you look at the situation in Iraq, it's become more Islamic after the attack. Afghanistan as well is, there's still Sharia courts in Afghanistan, and the EU, the European Union, just did a film, commissioned a film actually called Injustice about the situation of women in Afghanistan, and a few days before the film was supposed to be broadcast, they actually censored it because it showed such an abysmal situation for women there. There's the case of Golnaz, who was raped and made pregnant, and she was given 2 years sentence because she went and reported the rape. And when she appealed her case, she was then given a 12-year sentence. And she's come and spoken, on the film. And in the film, she says, it's not because I think anything's going to improve for my life, but because I want it not to happen to other women and girls in the country. And more than half of the women and girls in prisons in Afghanistan are people who are there for moral crimes. And so, there's a close linkage with Islamism and U.S.-led intervention and militarism. And I think it goes back to U.S. Foreign policy during the Cold War, where they wanted to create a green belt around the Soviet Union and Islamic belts. And since then, we did see a rise of the Islamic movement. The only problem I think it has with the Islamic movement is when its terrorist branch, the wing that comes out and attacks on 9/11 or 7/7 in London, and so that's what it's concerned about. But the fact that Sharia law and Islamism is terrorizing the populations at large in the region for decades is not really of its concern, and they're helping with setting up Sharia courts and so on and so forth around. So I guess what I want to say, that it could go the Islamic way. It will most likely go that way if we don't help and if we don't intervene. And I think we need to look at it as something that can change if we supporting secularists to the region. There are a lot of secularists in the region, and even if people in Libya haven't lived under Sharia law in the way that people in Iran have. They know what Sharia law means, because even if Islamists are not in power, if they have any say in your neighborhood or in your community, you know what that means for you as a woman, what that means for you as a girl, what that means for you as a man and boy. And so in that sense, they know it well, and but they need support in order to be able to fight back.
Yep, well said.
Could I bring up that question now?
Yes.
In the comment section, Stop Spamming One said that knowing what we know now from the perspective of what the Islamic regime has done, do you think that it was good to get rid of the Shah? Do you think we should have got rid of the Shah, or do you think it would have been better if we left the Shah in place? I'm specifically talking to you, Maryam, because you're native Iranian.
I mean, I don't think it's better to have kept the Shah. And I think what's important, there's a sound in the background. It's someone's
That's
mobile.
Kling. He's taking care of it.
The thing is that about Iran, I think what's important to remember is that it was not an Islamic revolution, even though history is written by victors, and it has been labeled an Islamic revolution ever since the Islamic Republic of Iran took power. But it was in fact a left-leaning revolution against dictatorship, for freedom, for equality, and it took a couple of years for the Islamic Republic of Iran to stabilize and maintain its power in Iran. If you know anything about Iran, when they issued the order for compulsory veiling, hundreds and thousands of people went onto the streets against compulsory veiling, men and women, including women who are veiled. And this demonstration was basically suppressed and fought back. And if you look at the history of Iran, you see that at the time when the regime was trying to maintain its power, that there were days in which hundreds of political prisoners were executed in an hour's time. And you know this because prisoners who came out, who managed to survive and come out afterwards, talked about sitting in their cells and counting the shots that were fired. Every second people were being executed, and there were cases in which someone was a young girl was arrested because of the way she looked, or a boy was arrested because of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And we talk about this period as being a period in which an entire generation was slaughtered in Iran in order for the regime to be able to maintain power. So it wasn't an Islamic revolution. And I think, as someone who believes in revolutions actually being the way in which people can really intervene and have a say in their lives and change things for the better, I could never say that a revolution was wrong, but it was hijacked by the Islamic movement. And I want to reiterate here that this was during the Cold War. This was during the time when U.S. foreign policy was supportive of the Islamic movement as a weapon against the Soviet Union at the time. And if you know Iranian history, you would know that they had a meeting in Guadeloupe. It was called the Guadeloupe Conference, where they decided that an Islamic state is the best option for Iran vis-a-vis the Soviet Union at the time. So I would say, yes, the Shah had to go. Yes, the revolution was a wonderful thing. And let me tell you this, if you look at the situation in Iran, and it's not because I was born in Iran and I'm involved in Iranian politics, I think any impartial observer can see that there is a huge movement against Islamism in that country. If you looked at the protests after the fraudulent elections in 2009, the modernity, the secularism, the humanism of those protest movements is very much a result of the politicization of the population as a result of the revolution. You can find other societies like Saudi Arabia, for example, where Islamism is suppressing people, but the opposition and resistance that's taken place in Iran is because of that revolution. And in the same way that we still feel the effects of the French Revolution, I think the Iranian Revolution has been key in helping a new generation, because the generation out on the streets now and in 2009 are not the generation that were slaughtered and spent years in as political prisoners. And so and I think that has had an effect even on the Arab Spring. And so it's a very important movement and a very important revolution, and one that if it succeeds, I think we'll realize the implications of it if we manage to win this fight.
Panel, what would you like to ask or discuss?
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. First off, I'd like to address Maryam, I believe. When I first joined the show, it was my understanding that you seemed to suggest that the Arab Spring would not incite the further implementation of Sharia law, or would not inspire further right-wing Islamic extremists to join these movements. I don't know if I've correctly represented your stance. If I haven't, I do apologize. If I have, and it is your opinion that these movements aren't really leading to a more Islamic Middle East, how do you justify that in light of what's recently happened in Libya with the declaration that Sharia law would form the basis of the constitution? I mean, that seems to me to be a fundamental move towards Islamification of the country. Whenever I've seen any sort of clips of freedom fighters on any news channel, generally all I see is Aliaa Magda. It seems that Islamic beliefs are somewhat implicit in the movements. How do you respond to that?
The Allahu Akbar is sort of an all-purpose phrase that isn't exclusive property of even conservatives, much less extremists. And you have to be a little bit, without going so far as to be conspiratorial in casting aspersions on news organizations, no matter what the agenda, or if they don't have an agenda, news organizations still abide by the rule that if it bleeds, it leads. And they do tend to send us the most dramatic pictures, and not many images of the silent majority, even a loud majority. They tend to show the pictures that evoke any kind of emotion. But the thing is, with all of these revolutions, there's really no way of knowing. You'll have a lot of people playing Monday morning quarterback after the dust has settled, saying that they saw it coming. You have a lot of people saying, like Klingschor was talking about, the many bigoted people in the West, they're chronically cynical about what the outcome will be. You have, and other people, sort of, crossing their fingers, hoping for a much rosier picture, that they'll somehow, you just add water and stir, and a Jeffersonian democracy will come up. If you look at the history of other countries that have sort of tacked into the wind towards greater personal liberty, greater representation in government, better human rights pictures, economic picture, and so forth, it's almost always been a very rocky road. If you look at, for example, the French Revolution, after which they had the Reign of Terror, and then a reinstating of monarchical authority later on, and there was the Napoleonic Wars and so forth. There was a long road with a lot of tribulation before they ended up being the France that we know now. So, and if you look, there's a lot of countries that today are very liberal and very progressive. I'd
say it's pointless trying to look ahead some 200 to 300 years. It's entirely unnecessary and pointless for our existence and pointless for the purpose of this debate. What you need to look at is the short term, and ultimately what can we look at as the short term? I don't know, the next 30 years, hypothetically. What you have is Sharia as the basis for the Constitution. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, you gentlemen know more about Sharia than I do, but my understanding is that it is derived from the Quran and the Hadith, which are immutable and cannot be altered. When you have this as the very basis of the legal system, it seems to me that you are strongly moving down the road towards a country that's going to be more Islamic rather than less.
With Sharia, it's actually, everyone claims that it is, and the jurists would say that it is, but in reality, it has more to do with the jurists themselves and there's a thing called ijma, which means consensus, and it's really, what the jurists say is what goes. So, for example, according to the hadith, it's recorded in Sunan Abu Dawud, which is the third most authentic hadith collection, that a woman was raped and that her single testimony was enough to get a man convicted and killed. As it turns out, according to the story, first they got the wrong man, and then the real man admitted before the other man was killed, but the point is that a single woman's testimony was enough. Whereas in Islamic law, in Sharia, a woman cannot even testify in a HUD case, of which rape, being a subset of zina, illicit sexual intercourse, is included. So that shows often there is actually a discrepancy between. I mean, they all suck. The Quran and Hadith suck, but there is sometimes discrepancy between what the Quran and Hadith say and what is in the Islamic law and the fiqh. Just putting it out there.
Can I just add? I mean, I think that. Whether Islamic jurisprudence is part of, and it is, Sharia is both, is the Quran, the Hadith, as well as Islamic jurisprudence, they're all very, bad news. They're bad news for anyone and everyone. I think the point I was trying to make was that, no society is homogeneous, right? There are various social movements and various types of resistance taking place. It's like any given society in America. There's the Tea Partiers, there's the 99%ers, there's the Occupy Wall Street, there are feminists and socialists and so on and so forth. And the same applies to, Libya and anywhere else, even if they're living under dictatorship. And in a sense, it's sort of, the problem I have is assuming that Islamism speaks for and on behalf of the society, whereas that's not true. It speaks on behalf of a segment of the society, the far right segment of that society, but not necessarily for everyone. And in a given society, there are so many opinions, like, Aliaa, the Egyptian blogger. There are so many like her that we often don't get to hear about or hear from. And even when we do, you have people who are considered progressive who are criticizing her for what she's doing and saying she shouldn't be doing this and that, rather than showing support. And I guess what I'm saying is that it is likely, obviously, what's happened in Libya, it is obviously becoming an Islamic state. My issue is, my point of contention is that let's not write it off. Let's not write it off, because what happens is also dependent on our intervention in the situation. Us as people. I'm not talking about NATO. I don't speak on behalf of NATO. I don't speak on behalf of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I don't speak on behalf of the Libyan government. As people, the human-to-human solidarity that is so crucial in bringing about positive change and has been throughout history. So I think, yes, it's clear, because look, it's always going to be easier for the Islamists to be able to organize in the region. One, because they've got huge amounts of money behind them, from the Saudi government to the Islamic Republic of Iran. They've got huge amounts of money that will back an Islamic party from day one. Where are the secularists? They're too busy saying, oh, I don't want to disrespect people's culture, and this is their culture, and we have to accept what they say. And as a result of post-colonial guilt, we have no right to intervene. And actually progressive speaking as if, they are part and parcel of the governments. So I guess this is where my problem lies, is if secularists and people who say religion should be kept separate from the state are not on the front lines of defending the secularists in Libya, well, the Islamists are going to win. But it's not a given, and it's not, a predestined. And in that sense, human will and intervention is crucial. And that's what we need to be focusing on and thinking about when we are talking about and showing concern about the situation in the region.
Can I bring up a random fun question?
Certainly.
Just change a sudden radical change of topic. This is the rationalizer. Unfortunately, couldn't join us since he's off globetrotting after some scientist. So he left a question that he wanted me to ask you, Maryam, and this is also one that I'm interested in. Apparently, it is said that among converts to Islam in the West, the majority of them are, for want of a better term, white women. I mean, am I white? People think I look like an Arab, and Atheismo thinks I'm a Turk or a Persian, but so the term white is whatever. But for the sake of brevity, let's just say white women in the West seem to be among the majority of the converts to Islam. Why is that? What is your opinion on that? Why do you think so many white women, for want of a better term, are converting to Islam?
Apart from, I can't say that. Well, I mean, I think that, I must really sound like I'm going on the same thing I go on about, but I think that, Islam is not a religion in and of itself in this day and age. I call it the Islamic Inquisition, and therefore everything I think is colored by the fact that there is an Inquisition going on, and there is a political movement that has Islam as its banner. And I think that when fascism is strong, you have people who join it, even if it seems that fascism is to their detriment and that it's actually targeting them. You'll always have people who will side with and work with oppressive forces, even though it seems that they shouldn't be doing it. I mean, I think when you look at how misogynist Islam and religion in general is, it's surprising that any woman, for example, would want to be a member of or believe in that religion. It's like, people who call themselves gay Muslims. I always find that such a contradiction in terms, because you would be killed according to Islamic law for having gay sex. And that sort of thing. But the reality is that, well, people do believe in these things, but converts in particular, I think, is because of the political Islamic movement, and that's why we're seeing a rise of women who are converting, and also, for example, it's linked to a rise in Sharia courts. It's linked to the fact that you'll find a lot of people are saying they don't recognize their neighborhoods anymore. There's so many women wearing burqas and the veil. That was not the case before. And you have people saying that, in the 60s it was very different, and today it's very different for women who are part of the Muslim community. So I do think it's a result of the rise of that movement. And I think the more that we fight it and the more that we push it back, the more we'll see a reduction in those numbers. I don't think this is an ideological thing. I know oftentimes it's portrayed as that. I do think we need to fight religion ideologically as well, but I think this battle today is a political one first and foremost. And therefore, for those who say that, they're so fed up with the pornography and the decadence and corruption of the West, and these women are going towards Islam. I mean, I think how you can, the fact that women are seen to be the source of corruption in Islam, that there is nothing more obscene than Islamic rules and laws and regulations, and that hates women. It hates women. I mean, the reality is that under Sharia law, to be a woman is a crime. And for people to say that they are going towards Islam in this day and age because it makes them feel freer and liberated is, I think it's the propaganda of the Islamic movement, and some people have bought into it. But I do think that this movement is being pushed back in many places, like in Iran, and there's a fight going on. And so I think that we'll see how many converts will end up remaining with Islam. But I mean, the other question I always ask is, because everything is so focused on promoting Islam and seeing the Muslim community as one homogeneous group, so we're all in love with Islam, where are the studies to show how many people are leaving Islam? Where are the studies to show how many people want to leave Islam but can't?
Rationalizer actually called into a show. It was some sort of a fundraiser done by either the IERA or a group affiliated with them. I think it was the IERA. And he actually called in and trolled them a bit under another name. But on the show, as they were raising money to send people to this sort of Muslim prayer boot camp type thing where they take new converts and give them guidance and so forth and so on. And it's like a very religious Muslim Boy Scouts, I suppose. They actually disclose themselves their own figures of how many new Western converts were leaving and sort of going through this revolving door. And it was by far the majority. So by their own admission, a group that is focusing on dawah and the spread of Muslim in the industrialized world, especially in England in this case, a lot of them come, they stay for a very short time, and then they leave. And I think they were measuring it in weeks or months, not even years. So, and a lot of them are younger, and I don't know where Kling and Rash are getting the data from. I'd be curious to know if more young women are coming in than young men. By what ratio is it? Is it really dramatic? But obviously, not a lot of these people, these kids who are joining Islam and then immediately leaving, are suddenly waking up one morning and saying, you know what, I think Muhammad really did speak to an angel, and I think he really is the last prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are treating it, in my humble opinion, not to sound too hard on them, they're treating it the same way young people used to treat the goth movement or things like this. And when you have when you have this drastic level of this climate of tension between Islam and everyone else, but especially with the West, what's more rebellious? What's going to shock your elders more than to join this group, even if it's for a short period of time? And I really think that is the driving force. And if in fact young women do make the majority, that doesn't really surprise me if you look at it through this lens. It explains everything, because it's going to raise eyebrows. It's going to shock people, and I think that to a large extent is what many of these people are after. Because, like I said, I really doubt that they, read the Quran and were enthralled by it or anything like that. They are doing it either for peer pressure purposes or nonconformity reasons. Otherwise, if they really thought it was the true religion, they wouldn't be going through this revolving door so often.
I mean, can I just? Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just quickly, when I was at SOAS, I was with a English convert called Kate Zabiri, and she had converted to Islam after meeting an Algerian guy, and I believe she's the one who actually produced this report fairly recently. I think she's at Exeter University now, and she actually did the survey, which a lot of this sort of media news has come from. And basically, I think it's quite simple, really. Muslim men can marry non-Muslim women. Muslim women can't marry non-Muslim men. So, it's a simple thing that you've got a lot of immigrants coming to this country and marrying English Christian women, who then convert to Islam because of emotional reasons, going to a Muslim country, finding a huge new extended family, lovely food, couscous and all these things, and then coming in through that way. And I think that I don't know how wide Kate Zabiri's study was, but I'm pretty sure it was also motivated by her own desire to kind of establish the fact that all these women are converting like herself.
And also, the thing is that you can't really know the real numbers, because one of the things is converts are very visible, but a lot of people who've left Islam or are closet atheists, for example, are invisible to some extent. You have people who are members of the Council of Ex-Muslims who are still veiled, because of the fear and threats and intimidations that are associated with it. Not everyone obviously goes through that, but there are quite a few people who do go through that, and therefore, when people can't honestly say that they are ex-Muslims, they've left, and only those who are converts can speak freely about why they've joined, I think it gives an imbalanced view of the realities. But even if, the majority of people in Britain became converts to Islam, it wouldn't necessarily mean that it was good. Numbers are not necessarily, don't necessarily explain anything in and of themselves. And so in that sense, I think that from my perspective, I mean, Hassan has a point about the marriage issue, but from my perspective, I think it's a political one. If you lived during the 60s, you joined the, sex, love, and rock and roll movement. In the 80s or whatever, you're part of the anti-apartheid movement. Now, well, thank goodness for the 99% movement. But before that, what was happening was that a lot of people, the only movements that were visible to them were far-right movements, whether it was in, the European far-right or the Islamist far-right. And particularly when you have a left that is so apologetic for Islamism and defends Islamism in many instances, it's very hard for people to find a progressive home. And obviously things are changing so much now, but and I think that also had a reason for the rise of converts in the West.
Okay, so in summary,
we're going to say goodbye to you.
Hold on. Before you say goodbye to me, there's two more things that I'd briefly like to add, because I've also got to leave. Firstly, to address Maryam, there are technically no Sharia courts in the UK. Sharia law in the UK is not dispensed by courts. Instead, it's a different sort of body, and you can't really equate them with courts. Then secondly, in response to something that Klingschor was saying much earlier on in the show about cultural relativism and accepting the views of whatever country, whatever people in country X, Y, or Z in the Middle East with regards to Sharia law, stonings, beheading, whatever the case may be. Personally, Klingschor, I don't think it is an acceptable.
I'm not a cultural relativist. No, you've misunderstood me. I am not.
Well, ultimately, that is what it is.
No.
By the majority of the people there, it should be censored.
I'm not going to be strawmanned. I'm not going to be strawmanned.
Fine.
What I said was that.
Hold on.
No, you've misunderstood.
Kling. Let Isno get both of his questions out and then come back.
All right. So ask your question.
To state your arguments as close to verbatim as I possibly could. By consensus of the majority of people there, it should be censored. And I am saying that is not acceptable. Is that?
I agree.
Is that in any way not understandable? Then my real objection is when you generally just lob everyone who holds the view that inhumane, immoral treatment, things like Sharia law should not be acceptable in those countries. You generally tend to lob them into one big group as a bigot, and that is what you did earlier on in the show.
Allow me to clarify.
Hold on. I fundamentally reject that I, as a person who stands against immoral treatment, stands against Sharia law on the very basis of its legal system, on the very basis that it's based upon texts that are 2,000 years old, on the basis that a country like Saudi Arabia has ratified UN Convention on Human Rights, but in that same tone has said it will derogate on anything that contravenes Sharia law. I object to that, so I don't think
you both off really quick, sorry, Kling, I know that you're chomping at the bit to come to your own defense, but allow me to cut in because I took something away from what you said that was very different from what Isno said. When Klingschor spoke about bigots and what their attitudes were towards the Arab Spring and things like this, I took away something very different from it. I mean, I took for granted that he was talking about a subdivision of opponents to Muslims that doesn't include us who are critics of the religion and society. I mean, there are people who I usually refer to as the tribalists who don't like Islam because of any particular trait of it, but they don't like Muslims because they're different. And they're a very different breed than you or I or Klingschor.
Maybe I've misinterpreted
that's not what I took from it. All right, well, allow me to clarify then. It's very easy to put up a straw and defeat it. Let me actually clarify what my actual position was, and I thought I stated this clearly, apparently not. So let me now remedy that. First of all, let me start with the anti-Muslim bigots. What I was saying was, with Libya, most of the people who I have seen This is what I said. Most of the people I've seen saying it's going to become an Islamic State, most of them are anti-Muslim bigots who are merely saying it because they're saying, oh yes, they're Muslims and they'll automatically turn to Sharia, rather than actually having a proper analysis of the situation. That is what I was saying. I'm not saying that everyone who says that is an anti-Muslim bigot. All I was saying was a large percentage of the people who I have seen who are saying that Libya will turn into an Islamic State were anti-Muslim bigots. That is what I was saying. I'm not saying that everyone was. So that's point one. Point two, what I was saying with the majority and with the I have got 2 YouTube channels dedicated to debunking Islam and exposing the atrocities of Islam and Islamic law. Okay, I am fundamentally against Islamism. All that I was saying was, if a country like Libya adopts Sharia law, what we can't do is invade. That's all I was saying. Invade, if the majority accept it and embrace all these barbaric practices, and then we invade, it'll just make the problem worse. It'll make them less likely to give them up. So instead, we will have to take a different approach to trying to eliminate Sharia law in that country. That is all I was trying to get at. If we invade a country that doesn't want us to invade and has embraced Sharia law and all this barbarism, then we'll have to take a different tact. By simply invading, that will just exacerbate the problem, and the population will, they'll be under threat, and so they'll rally against it, and the rallying call will, of course, be what they already have, which would be Sharia, which will entrench it deeper into the society. That is all I was saying. I was not promoting Islamism. I was not saying we should accept it. I was simply saying we would have to take a different tact. That is all I was getting at. Do you understand?
Can I also add some things? Is that all right? Before I do that, I always find it interesting when people in the West say we shouldn't invade. I guess when you've lived under a dictatorship, you would never say we, because you see yourself so different from the government. And people who live under parliamentary democracies, because they think they have a say in what goes on, where we actually know they don't, they use the concept of we, and I think that can be quite confusing as well, possibly, because I do understand what you're saying, but I did get that impression initially too, and I think it's because of the use of that term. What I wanted to make just 2 points. I'm sorry, I think I'm talking too much, but one of the issues is on the far right and Islamism. I think actually, and I've said this before, Islamism is a far-right movement. And if you look at groups like Stop Islamization of America, Stop Islamization of Europe, the English Defence League, the British National Party, and you compare it with Islamist groups, you see that actually they have a lot more in common than not. Just to give you a couple of subheadings, they are both misogynist, they're homophobic, they use violence and threats and intimidations to get to their aims, and they're very inhuman movements, and they place collective blame. So the Islamists will bomb a discotheque because everyone's at fault, and the English Defence League will attack anyone who looks Asian because you're all Islamists and you all want Sharia law. It's sort of giving collective blame and not seeing people as human beings, and in a sense they have a lot in common. They're part of the same movement, and I think we need to oppose them unequivocally, both of them. What one of the problems I have is you have people who are progressive and on the left who will often apologize for Islamism and say that and stand with Islamists against their own fascists. So we organized a demonstration in front of Downing Street against Sharia law in Britain, and you had the Al-Muhajirun group, Muslims for UK and all, they're banned now, but they had a counter demonstration against us. And you had Unite Against Fascism, which I would think I have some affinity with. They're progressives, they're anti-fascists, who actually joined them, joined the fascists, joined the Islamic fascists against us. And I think this is the problem, when you don't look at things from a position of principle and you start with my enemy's enemy is my friend, and so on and so forth, you end up allying with the Islamists and with even though you say you're anti-fascist sort of thing. So I think it is important to stand up against Islamism, and obviously against the far right too. One of the things I always say is that just because they say they're anti-Sharia doesn't mean we want the same thing or we're on the same page. It's like, you know, I'm a women's rights campaigner. Bush might say he attacked Iraq for a defense of women's rights, but do you really believe him? No, it's what they say. They lie all the time in order to take forward their policies, and Islamists do that as well. And I am still a women's rights campaigner, whether or not Bush says what he says, because the reality is that what Bush says and what I say, even if we both use the term women's rights, we're doing it and supporting it for very different reasons. We are anti-Sharia. I am anti-Sharia because I think it's an attack on the rights of women, men, children, including and particularly Muslim women. They do it because they're anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant, you know. So there are a lot of reasons you can find, ways you can find that show that we actually are on opposing ends of the argument. And just because of the use of the same terms doesn't necessarily make us part of the same movement. And one of the things we've been doing at the One Law for All campaign is trying to make very clear the distinctions. We've done a report called Enemies Not Allies about the far right, and to say why they need to be attacked and pushed back just as much as the Islamists are. But just going back to the issue of Sharia law, there are Sharia courts in Britain. Is no God says there isn't. Well don't tell me.
Technically, no, they're not courts.
No, if I can just...
They are, sure. They're not condemned.
Sure. The thing is that...
It's just about the names, I guess, and terminology.
No, there is a fundamental difference.
Can you let Maryam speak?
I understand that you're studying law, is no God, so could you explain what the difference is?
Well, let Maryam speak and then I'll come
Let Maryam speak.
Well, I mean, there are Sharia courts. The judges who sit on them, the Islamic Sharia Council and the Muslim Arbitration Tribunal, they call themselves Sharia courts, and they give fatwas and judgments to thousands upon thousands of people. They have tried over 8,000 cases, the Islamic Sharia Councils have, and so have the Muslim Arbitration Tribunals. They're dealing with mainly civil aspects of Sharia law, which is divorce, child custody, and so on and so forth. And they have legal standing, particularly since they're using the Arbitration Act in order to make their decisions. But not only are they addressing civil matters, they're also entering into criminal areas of the law, particularly when it comes to domestic violence and marital rape. And there's ample evidence of this. We've actually done a report called Sharia Law in Britain, A Threat to One Law for All and Equal Rights, where we talk about these courts, their numbers, the judgments that they're passing, and how they have legal standing and the effects they're having on people's rights and lives in this country. So there are Sharia courts. If you don't think there are Sharia courts, you shouldn't be telling me. You should go and tell those judges and courts that hold court day in and day out without any lawyer, without any accountability. There's none of their decisions are recorded or reported, but people who are given those decisions are made to sign that they will abide by those decisions. And as one of the Sharia court judges has said, that if you don't abide by it, it's worse than just not listening to what we say. It's tantamount to apostasy and heresy, because you're not listening to a religious ruling that you must abide by. So, and there's ample evidence on this. I know that the British government says that there's no such thing as Sharia courts, but that's because it prefers to relegate the Muslim community to parasitical imams and leaders and courts, and shrug its responsibility to large segments of citizens in this country. And what we're saying is they don't have a right to do that. People in this country, as people everywhere, have a right to the highest standards that are available to them. And it is scandalous that there are people whose marriages, whose divorces, whose child custodies are being determined by ancient religious laws and texts that are misogynist and discriminatory at best.
Okay, may I respond to that then?
Yeah, please do.
Back, because I think that essentially you and Maryam may get hung up on the issue of
semantics.
It's a semantical difference between a court and a tribunal. Hold on, wait.
It is absolutely not an issue of semantics.
No, it is, because they
No, it isn't.
consider
Hold
them.
on.
The
You don't
UK government
on.
considers these groups to be
Moses.
what is it? I forget, arbitrators. But in their minds, they're courts.
But arbitration is part of
Do
the
you
law
mind
in
if I
this country.
respond? I was told I would get a chance to respond. So
Yeah, sorry, go
it's
ahead.
seemingly pointless if I can't respond. You're going to then respond for me.
Go ahead.
The basic thing that you've omitted, Maryam, is that these Sharia courts, as you term them, are not courts where you have to attend. They are not obligatory. It is done so under contract. You can elect whether you want to be party to the ruling of that court. If you elect not to, it is entirely not valid and is not enforceable. Insofar as what the courts actually do in practice, I agree very much with you. I've even seen the head of the Muslim Arbitration Tribunal, forgive me, I don't remember his name.
Siddiqui.
Oh no, this is a different gentleman. I won't remember the name offhand.
Sahib Hassan? Sahib Hassan?
No, I wouldn't remember the name. I'm sorry. I have a video,
Chowdhury.
and I'll link the video in the chat. But it was the founder of the Muslim Arbitration Tribunal, MAT, and
Yes,
that's under their website.
Siddiqui.
Whatever his name is, that
Yeah.
specific gentleman was campaigning very, very hard for matters of criminal law, just as you said, divorce, etc., to be brought under the ambit of these tribunals. And they are oppressive, especially to women, because you're in a situation where these women have nowhere else to go. They can either accept being rejected by their communities at large and seek a remedy in a proper court, or they can seek remedy in one of these tribunals, and generally they tend to go for the tribunals. And then you have all these unrecorded judgments that are held in private, etc., etc. And yes, they are legally binding, but the most important issue is they're simply not courts for the fact that
That's what it all binds down to. It doesn't matter if they have a court where they have a religion where they do the South Park thing and they say, okay, we're going to set this chicken down and throw some feed, and the first place that it pecks, that determines what the ruling is. The fact is they do have binding results. So even though I acknowledge the difference between the tribunals and an actual court, for their purposes, they're courts. You give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And last but not least, I don't think that a priest or imam should be so much as allowed to offer his opinion on a traffic ticket, much less matters of divorce and child custody.
No, I think what Isno God is
Let's let
saying.
Isno come back to what I said.
You do not have to submit to their jurisdiction.
Right.
That is the big fundamental difference between a court and what you have with the Sharia arbitration tribunals.
Can I just intervene? I understand what you're saying. We agree on the fact that you also think that they're discriminatory. What you're saying is that it's voluntary, that people can choose to go to them if they want. That's why you're saying that it's not a court. What I want to say to you is that it isn't voluntary, in the sense that again, going back to the climate and the context that we're speaking in, that there is a lot of pressure and intimidation on women in particular to go to these courts, because they are family courts after all, and women are the ones that have to go to them. Men have, for example, the unilateral right to divorce. They don't need to go to these courts. Women do, particularly when men are refusing to give them a divorce because they can have 4 wives. What I want to tell you is that it's not voluntary in the real sense of the term, because of the intimidation and pressure I mentioned. And there are studies, there are not many, because of the fact that, this is an issue that is being swept under the carpet, but there are enough studies to show that it's not really voluntary. There is a Muslim professor at the University of Reading, Samia Bano. She sat in on 10 of these Sharia courts, and she said that out of the 10 women who had come to these courts, 4 of them had civil injunctions against their husbands for violent and threatening behavior, which means that they were not supposed to be anywhere near their husbands, but they had dragged their wives to the Sharia courts in order to renegotiate child custody and so on and so forth that had already been decided in a British civil court. it's not as voluntary as you make it as is being portrayed. Now, just to give you an example, I read recently about this report that was done by an Oriental Studies department in Bombay, in Mumbai, about the practice of sati, which is the practice of women having to throw their bodies over the burning pyres of their husbands. And in that study, this distinguished department came to the conclusion that out of 40 eyewitness accounts of sati, only 2 of them were not voluntary. The rest were voluntary, and therefore sati should not be denigrated. People choose to commit suicide if they want. They choose to throw themselves on their burning pyres, and therefore there should be a law against it. The reality of the matter is, though, for any rational person, is that there is pressure and intimidation going on there. No one voluntarily throws themselves on the burning pyres of anyone. And I think that is the realities with Sharia courts as well. There's a lot of pressure. I mean, if you speak, because there are Muslim women who've joined our campaign, and I think the more our campaign gains strength, the more Muslim women will be able to join it, and a number of them have, including Muslim women's rights organizations. One of the things they say is that 30 years ago, none of them had to go to Sharia court. Today, it's a given; they have to go. And again, I think it's corresponding with the rise of the Islamic movement and the pressures that are on women. And so, again, this whole issue of voluntary and choice, I think, is a cop-out, really, for people to be able to say, well, you know, if adult women choose to do it, it's their choice. There isn't very much choice involved, and that's why I think we need to come out very clearly against these courts.
To a lot of women, to say, no, I'm not going to go to these Sharia courts is tantamount to saying, I don't want to be a Muslim anymore.
Broadly speaking, I agree with both of you. I am absolutely opposed to Sharia courts in the UK. I have a lot of respect for any organization that would oppose it, so I don't want it to seem as if I am advocating for these courts. I'm simply saying it would be slightly more accurate to include the fact that they are ultimately voluntary. I do agree that there's a lot of pressure in the community to force people, particularly women, to go to these court systems, and that's a big problem. It suggests there's a fundamental problem within the Islamic community within the UK, in that they are, in essence, building their own legal system. And I wish it could be stopped, but at this point, it doesn't seem like it. Anyhow, I've got nothing more to add.
Yeah. I'm going to let you go. Thanks, Isno, for calling in. We appreciate all callers, but we especially appreciate Counterpoint. Take care. And
have a good one. Thank you.
I'm kicking them out. If anyone wants to join the show, we just send a friend request on Skype to The Gin and Tonic Show, and we will call you in. Please, when you send the friend request, give us how you would like to be introduced and what you would like to discuss.
Can I just say one thing to Isno?
Yes.
Sorry. I mean, on the issue of, Sharia courts, there was a campaign against Sharia courts in Canada as well, and in Ontario province in Canada. I was involved in that campaign a couple of years ago. It was something that the government had decided to allow for Sharia courts in Ontario province, because a Jewish Beth Din already existed, as well as Native Indian courts. And there was a huge campaign against it, and eventually the government of Ontario came down and said, one secular law for all, no Sharia, no Beth Din, no nothing, one secular law for everybody. And it has happened. Obviously, the role of religion in Britain is very different. It's entrenched. I mean, you have bishops in the House of Lords. You have, the Queen being the head of the Church of England. It's much more entrenched, much more difficult. And Britain is also a stronghold of the Islamic movement. But it is possible. It's been done before. It is possible. I think one of our, as a campaigner against Sharia law in Britain, one of our main problems is that there is a lot of good people who are against Sharia courts because they are pro-women's rights, pro-human rights. Not because they're anti-immigrant and Muslim, but they are silent because it is deemed racist and Islamophobic to criticize Islam in Sharia courts, and because they don't want to be seen to be anywhere near the far right. What our campaign, One Law for All, is doing is making it possible for people to be able to come out and oppose it from a progressive and from a rights perspective. And I think this is hugely important for the Muslim community. And again, I put that in quotes because there are so many different characteristics that people have within that so-called community. Recently, a women's rights campaigner told me that she had spoken to Muslim women who organized against Sharia law in Canada. And she said at a recent meeting, they had said that had it not been for us secularists organizing against Sharia law in Canada, they would never have had the space to come out and speak out against it. So in that sense, it's really important for us to open the way, push the way open. It's sort of like the Council of Ex-Muslims. There's 25 people who start the Council of Ex-Muslim. Now there are thousands upon thousands who are part of it, if not publicly. It's about pushing the space open for people to dissent, to resist. If everyone says, this is your culture, that's all you get, that's all you deserve, it leaves no room for people to resist, no room for people to question. And in a sense, I think that's why it's really important for campaigns like ours and for it to be supported, really, because it helps Muslim women and Muslim men and, people who consider themselves Muslim to do that too.
So, with the Sharia courts and what Isnogod was saying, I guess the whole issue can be summarized in a single short sentence. In theory, it's voluntary. In practice, there is coercion. I guess that just completely summarizes it.
Yeah.
I don't fault Isno and people like him for wanting clarity on the issue, and he wants to make us to make the distinction that they don't have complete jurisdiction. Like if you're a Muslim, you are necessarily going to be tried, or but
yeah.
It is a very slippery slope, and the thing is, they talk about accepting the arbitration, strictly speaking, isn't going to be forced upon you, but certainly when that portcullis slams down behind you, you're going to have some regrets when you realize that you're not necessarily going to receive what you would receive certainly in the mainstream system, the proper legal system, and you might just be horrified at the results. I knew a guy a long time ago when he was he's an old man now. When he was very young, he got arrested for walking down a street drunk, and he had been kind of a thorn in the local authorities' side, but they never really had anything to throw at him because he was like selling some marijuana or something, and they knew he was doing it, but they never caught him. So the police just were looking to get him for something, and he was walking down the street drunk. They arrested him, and the public defender that he got issued to him said, "Look, kid, just go up there, plead guilty. They'll give you a slap on the wrist, suspended, community service, some sort of thing. You can beat this. It's not that big a deal. It's just walking down the street drunk." And the judge there either just did not like this guy at all, or there was some rap sheet he had, some of the concerns of the local police department and how this guy was just a long-haired troublemaker and they didn't like him and so forth. That got to him, and the judge threw him in prison based on his guilty plea. And the guy from the witness, the stand, he jumped off the stand and was tackled by the bailiffs because he was trying to get his hands around the throat of the public defender, and they had to dismiss the court and break up this fight between him and the bailiffs. But they threw him in prison, and I bet that public defender would say, well, nobody made him enter the guilty plea. Sure, I told him to do it. I advised him to do it as his public defender. But I'm sure that the majority of people who really got the shaft from these they're Islamic courts from the perspective of the courts, but whatever you want to call them, these tribunals, these arbitration bodies, once that portcullis of their decision slams shut behind them, I'm sure they must have an impending sense of dread and a deep-seated dissatisfaction with the process and the rulings.
But I'm sorry, can I just say something? I think and they don't have legal standing. They do. They have legal standing. And so in that sense, they are courts. Yes, like there are 300 arbitration courts in Britain. People choose to go to them. They're meant to be for specialized areas, for example, in areas of business and areas where you need specialization to be able to address certain questions. It was never meant to be used for family and child custody issues, which is what it's being used now. The government itself has said that it's not meant to be used for family and child custody matters. And there's a bill now in the House of Lords that has been initiated as a result of our campaign that is striving to make it illegal to deal with family and child custody matters and criminal matters, because as it stands right now, they're not supposed to do it, but it's not illegal for them to do it, and that's why they're doing it. So just because people agree to go to court, it doesn't mean that they don't have to abide by those judgments, or that they're not courts. So I think we need to be clear about that as well, because I don't want people getting the impression that they're not really courts and they have no legal standing. They do.
Majority countries, it seems like many of the abhorrent practices that we look askance at, both Westerners in general and moderate to liberal Muslims as well, most of them aren't necessarily the state itself enacting these punishments and measures. Often it's just the societies in general, and a display of just how tight the grip of the clergy often is on the Muslim population.
I don't necessarily agree in the sense that I don't think that, I think that oftentimes the media likes to portray everyone as being one and the same with Islam. It's not the case. If you look at Iran, for example, the Iranian regime has been forced to stop stoning people to death in public, and the recent stonings that have taken place have all taken place in prisons and by their own guards. Because there is so much outrage and abhorrence of the act of stoning. There is one case of Kat Khoda Zolekha, who was actually pulled out by the villagers, and it was done in a village. It wasn't even in the middle of the city where you could say, well, it's the educated who are opposed to it. In a small village in Kurdistan, where they actually pulled her out to try to stop the stoning from taking place. So there is a lot of resistance that takes place, and an abhorrence of these acts. I heard recently a report on a stoning that was taking place in Somalia, and Somalia doesn't have the revolutionary history and the history of struggle against Islamism that people in Iran do. But even in Somalia, which has been made into a swamp, really, partially by US-led militarism and partially by Islamism, you find this resistance comes through sometimes if you listen carefully to the media reports. It was a report about a girl who was being stoned because she had reported her rape to the Islamic police. Big mistake. And she was taken... the Islamic militia said that she wanted to be stoned because she deserved it, whereas actually you hear reports from the public there saying that she was kicking and screaming and being dragged to it. And also it seems that there was a sort of, resistance to it, an opposition to it, to the point where an 8-year-old boy or a 10-year-old boy was shot dead. So obviously people tried to intervene to stop the stoning. So there are lots and lots of instances of these sorts of resistance that take place. Unfortunately, you hardly hear about them in the media, but as a result of YouTube and citizenship journalism and Twitter, you're seeing the human face of people in those societies, and in a sense it's giving an alternative viewpoint, which is an important one because there is a lot of opposition.
Could I again make a random point that goes back to something previously said? With the large segments of the left, I suppose, siding with Islamists, I guess what I would call that is an alliance of convenience. It's like when the Chinese communists and the Chinese nationalists allied themselves to fight the Japanese during the First World War. As soon as the threat was gone, they turned on each other. It's like when the communists, Russians, and the Americans allied to fight the Nazis. Once the Nazis were gone, they turned on each other. And it's like these far-right atheists and the far-right Christians ally each other against Islam. The moment Islam's gone, they'll turn on each other. And I think with this, the far left and I mean, it's not to cast aspersions on your own communist beliefs, Namazie, right? But at my university, the communist organizations there, and this seems very common in a lot of communist organizations, they support organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah, and these organizations. I mean, they support Hamas and Hezbollah because Hamas and Hezbollah are against the West, and so anyone who's against their enemy is their allies. And yet they also support homosexual rights, but, I mean, Hamas and Hezbollah, I think, kill homosexuals, or support this Sharia that would kill homosexuals. So I find it quite bizarre that they support people who kill the people who they also support. I mean, it's just... it's just this alliance of convenience, and I think for me personally, when I first started making videos on YouTube about Islam, I would often just find myself being supported by these anti-Muslim bigots, these far right, atheists and Christians who support the likes of Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, Geert Wilders, and so forth. And it was so as I became more and more educated and more and more research into Islam, I was able to discover that the people who I had previously supported, Wilders, Geller, and so forth, Spencer, were actually completely full of shit. Utterly full of it. There's lie and lie and lie, and you think, Spencer looks brown, so he must be an ex-Muslim, or just, he must be some kind of expert. No, they just lie and lie and lie, and it was so vindicating, unimaginably vindicating when I learned that you and your organization and are against the far right, because I'm socially liberal and socially progressive, and it's so vindicating to your allies. What is it? Enemies, not allies. It's just I think it really helps those of us who are socially progressive but were against and it's like I said when you came to Melbourne. To the Penn Centre, I was actually there. I'm the Italian descent guy. And
you should have said that sooner.
See, I told you I had a YouTube channel when I was on the internet. It's so, and like I was talking to this gay guy there, and he was saying, these socially liberal and socially progressive people who are against Islam as an ideology or as a religion, and also. It's so vindicating that we don't have to be bundled in with the far right, and we can stand on our own as humanists, as people for human rights and for freedom. I think it's really vindicating.
It's really bizarre the sort of strange bedfellows that various different political, social, and religious groups make, especially when they mix or match two of the three things. And it's really peculiar who ends up on which side and which alliances would be sort of self-evidently doomed to disintegrate were they to prevail. And I think that, if you're a consistent critic of religion as a whole and Islam in particular, one of the most persistent and frustrating things is people who are generally socially liberal who either pull their punches in critique with Islam, discourage critique of Islam, or sort of are more preoccupied with criticizing the critics and so forth. And that, if you say something that's incorrect and someone corrects you, like, you have no business to complain. But there are some who, I guess the temptation is to call them the sort of useful idiots. They used to say that there's this quote, it may be apocryphal, that was attributed to Lenin about useful idiots in the West who were, inadvertently helping him and sympathetic towards his regime and so forth. And there are people who are very socially liberal who seem to be making excuses, or at least seem somewhat reticent to criticize Islam. And this is a very touchy subject, but I do think it's frustrating when I find someone who is trying to talk me or someone else out of criticizing this religion or the culture around it, the political entities and so forth, when if they were to take a blind taste test of the society values espoused by the doctrine that Islam is based upon, they would spit it out. If you could put, if you could put all the different policies that are inherent. They're in black and white, no matter how much people might try to twist the words of the Quran or the Hadith collections. There's still some things that are pretty clear, and there's very little wiggle room. And if people were to just, like I said, put on a blindfold and taste what they were drinking, I think that they would spit it out. So it's always very troubling and irritating when you have a sort of de facto alliance between very, very liberal people in the West and I'll just say Islamists to get lazy. Islamists who exploit that sentiment, like exploit the sentiment of the desire for pluralism, the desire for acceptance of people, people of all different backgrounds. It's just, and I think that at the end of the day, it's just another insidious way in which religion co-opts positive aspects of human behavior, because the desire for a tolerant society is ultimately, I believe, a purely virtuous one, but it is a kind of, like any other form of kindness, it can be exploited by other people who are very amoral.
And one of the things, that I realized, because I came to the fight against Sharia law in Britain from a background of fighting against the Islamic regime in Iran. And one of the things I explained to a lot of my co-activists was that in Europe, because of the far right, you can't just attack Islam. You have to attack religion in general, and you have to do it within the context of fighting the far right at the same time. You can't just focus on Sharia law and on Islamism because of the far right's hijacking of this issue and jumping on the bandwagon, basically. And I think some of the points of ways in which you can quickly show your distinction between it is attacking religion, because the reality is that the far right has no problem with religion's role in society. What they have a problem with is Islam's taking over a Christian Europe and West. It's far from a Christian Europe and West, but that's their take on it. The other is defending secularism, because it's the separation of religion from the state, and this is something that the far right are not interested in at all. And also it's defending Muslims and immigrants, and showing how there is no one Muslim community, and how so many of the immigrants who are here in the West have fled Islamism and have fought it. I think that is quite important to make these distinctions throughout the journey. But on the left, I mean, for me, the far right is so despicable and so like Islamism. We came out with this report, Enemies Not Allies, because I was shocked at the number of people who were humanists and secularists who thought the English Defence League isn't so bad, or Stop Islamization of Europe is okay. They're not the British National Party. They've got Jewish division and a women's division and a gay division. And again, it's, the far right has become very clever in the same way that Islamists use rights language in order to deny rights and to attack people. The far right, a segment of it, has become quite subtle in their language, though if you really look at them, not even very deeply, just even at a superficial level, you see how very much linked they are to the neo-Nazi movement, the fascist movement, how all of the things we discussed before. So that's a given. But for me, I mean, I find the left's defense of Islamism a betrayal, such a betrayal. To think that you would support people that don't allow the right to strike in Iran, that throws acid in the faces of women who want to dress without the veil, who burn down schools for girls. You've got the Saudi Vice Squad, Vice and Virtue Squad, stopping girls from running out of a burning building because they're not veiled, and letting them die. This is the reality of so many people in the Middle East and North Africa. And what's more importantly, it's now the reality of so many people living in your neighborhoods and communities here in the West. You have a Muslim woman counselor in Tower Hamlets saying that she's had to start dressing more conservatively because of the death threat she's gotten for not wearing the hijab. You've got an imam these are Muslims who are speaking out against discrimination against women and who are facing death threats. And then you've got the progressives and lefts taking the side of Islamism. So it is a betrayal, and I think that it's important for people on the left who don't support Islamism to come out and speak out, so that people on the left, people who are progressive, will find an alternative way to battle against both. And I think that is one of the beauties, really, of One Law for All. I mean, there's a lot of campaigns I've worked on, but I think this is one of those campaigns that go to the depth of society and in the fight that takes place. One last thing I do want to say is that I don't care what communist government went into bed with whatever fascist government and vice versa. Again, I don't speak on behalf of governments. I don't trust any of them, to be quite frank. And, for me, I will never get into bed with, someone on the far right, someone who's a fascist, no matter how much he seems to support my goals, because I know that fundamentally we are on opposite ends of the spectrum, and language alone is not enough. In the same way that you don't believe Bush when he says he's invaded Iraq for women's rights, why believe someone on the far right that says they're anti-sharia, when in fact you can see clear as day that they are attacking Muslims and immigrants left, right and center, bringing in their far right views. I do think it is possible, like in the One Law for All campaign, to work with people on all sides of the spectrum, but on a specific aim, rather than working on, so you will have people in the One Law for All campaign who are conservative, who are liberals, who are communists, who are Muslim, all for the aim of getting rid of Sharia law. I think that is possible, but I think, again, if we start with principle, we won't get into the problem of my enemy's enemy is my friend. What's right? What's wrong? I think that's what we need to be asking ourselves and siding with that which is right.
Okay, Hassan, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, I just want to say, on a personal note, when I was having doubts about Islam, I went through a long period where, I had so many doubts and so many questions, and I remember going online on the internet, and I came across a site called Faith Freedom, which I think some of you might have heard of. And to be honest with you, that site, I don't know how to describe it, except that it just wanted to make me vomit. Mm-hmm. Some of the things that were being said, some of the right-wing nonsense that was being said, some of the, the Christian fundamentalists. And I felt very disillusioned. I didn't really want to come out publicly. In fact, I felt like going back and trying to work within Islam to try and, be a moderate force within Islam and staying a Muslim. Then I saw Maryam announced in the Council of Ex-Muslims, and I remember phoning her. I don't know whether you remember me phoning you, Maryam. I actually phoned you and I said, look, this is wonderful. We should start an internet forum and so on. And since then, we've got thousands who have joined us, who I think are in exactly the same position. They are sickened by the far right. They are sickened by the bigots. They are sickened by the way that they have hijacked the criticism of Islam, and they felt coward. They felt that if they spoke up, they would be somehow branded as being bigots. And honestly, what Maryam has done has opened a new door. You don't have to be a bigot. You don't have to be a far right. You don't have to hate individual Muslims. On the contrary, as Maryam always says, Muslims are the greatest victims of Islamism. And that was the thing that made me become public. So that was what made me, if you like, become an ex-Muslim and join. And I know thousands did as well. So I want to thank Maryam for that.
Oh, that's lovely, Hassan. I'm so happy. I didn't realize that. Oh, that's wonderful. Sorry, just one other thing is, so many of our loved ones are Muslims as well. Do you know what I mean? In the sense that, my father is the most wonderful person I've ever come across. He's a Muslim, and my grandfather was actually an Islamic scholar. My dad's told me, don't call him a mullah because there's such an anti-Islamic backlash in Iran. And I keep telling him, do you really think it's better calling him an Islamic scholar? But, he always says my grandfather's turning in his grave. I don't think you knew that was possible, but it seems that it is, because of the things I say and do. And again, there's so many of our loved ones that are Muslims, but also the reality is that we are all Muslim according to the far right. I remember when we first moved, after we left Iran, we went to India for 2 years because my mother is from Nepal. and my dad was brought up in India, so we were able to get visas to go there. And after 2 years, we weren't allowed to live there, so we came to Britain for a year, again, all on tourist visas, hiding from the immigration and so on and so forth, pretending we don't want to stay. And we weren't able to stay here as well, so we went to the States. But I remember when we were living in Bournemouth for that year, we were walking down the street, and this lady was shouting at my mom and me and my little sister and my dad. And my mom waved to her, thinking she's just being friendly, but actually she was saying, "You fucking foreigners, get out of Britain." And the reality is that racism affects all of us. You know, nobody says, "Oh, you're a good one," or "You're a bad one," or, you know, "I agree with your thoughts," because that's not how racists work. You hear about Sikhs being killed because the fascists thought he was a Muslim, and that's why it's always an attack on all immigrants and all so-called minorities. I hate that term as well, but you know, so in that sense, I think it's just shooting yourself in the foot if you think that you can ally yourself with the fascists. The first people they will put back on the boat to go back home is you. And whenever you have an argument with them, it's so interesting, because you start arguing with them, they say they're on your side. The minute you challenge them, they say, "Why don't you go back home to where you came from?" And that's it. That's the difference in perspective. And that's why I do think it's important to make that distinction. And I think the stronger we get, the problem is that we are censored by the media. They will publicize a demonstration of the English Defence League and, you know, the Islamist Al-Muhajirun group, but you have hundreds of people coming out in support of secularism, for equality, and there's a media blackout on the issue. So in that sense, I think it makes our work so much harder to get our word across to a mainstream audience. It's not as easy to do that, and I think that once that happens, I think things will change very quickly to our advantage.
Oh, if I can, you can. Okay. Just on a humorous note, when I was at your talk in Melbourne, Namazie, Maryam, there was a man and a woman sitting next to me, and when I asked the question and pointed out that the basis in the Sharia might derive from the hadith where Muhammad says that you know, women are mentally deficient compared to men. Naturally, this woman leant over with a pamphlet and she said, "You might like this, man. You know, you might like this." And it was a it was a pamphlet promoting Robert Spencer. And I feel really bad now, because I just turned, as soon as I saw it, I just snarled at her, "I hate that man." And I feel really bad now for my really violent response. I mean, I just, like, my face contorted into an angry mask. I just snarled at her. I feel so bad, but, you know.
No, don't.
But, yeah.
But the thing is that with people who defend, I will fight for the rights of Muslims to be Muslim, even though intellectually I disagree and I think that Islam sucks. I will, you know, I advocate the right of Muslims to be Muslim as long as they're not hurting anyone. And I think with people who defend, I mean, on the left, I guess I'm on the left because I'm socially progressive and liberal. Fiscally, I don't know where I stand, but socially progressive and liberal. So, I mean, for these people who are on the left, who do share that sort of sentiment, I mean, they defend, they in order to defend Muslims, they defend Islam in that they sort of, like, for example, oh yes, you know, Islam, you know, look at the Islamic Golden Age, like I mean, for these people, they don't seem to understand that it's okay to criticize Islam and to say, look, Muhammad, right? Muhammad murdered an entire, this is in the Sahih hadiths, you know, Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abu Dawud. He murdered an entire Jewish village. All the men were murdered, and the women and children were dispersed as slaves for all the Muslims. And of course, you know, the Quran says that we can have sex with slaves. So, I mean, it's okay to say that, and to also say, but it's okay for Muslims to live in our society as Muslims. Like, I guess it's striking that balance, and a lot of people on the left don't realize it, and they feel like they have to defend Islam or even lie about it and say, oh, you know, Islam doesn't do that, Islam, when it actually does. So It's I don't know. It's just I guess we have to it's really impress upon people that we're fine with Muslims being Muslim, and it's okay to be Muslim, but we're also against the ideology and we're against the religion and so forth. Sorry, Hassan, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I just want to quickly, Maryam, make a point that carrying on from what Klingschor said, you can't have a personal Islam until we get rid of Islamism, and I think Maryam has made that point. I would love to see Muslims, be able to live. You can have gay Muslims, you can have metaphysical Muslims, you can have, Muslims who interpret the Quran according to their own personal whims or whatever they like. But you can't have that until you get rid of Islamism, which tries to impose the true Islam. I mean, in my opinion, there's no such thing as true Islam. And I have no problem with the vast majority of Muslims who want to have their own personal Islam. They have their own personal Islam, but they are not allowed to practice it, or they are continually bullied and pressured by the Islamists. So in a way, what we are doing is also for the majority of ordinary peaceful Muslims to allow them to have their own personal Islam. At the moment, you can't have that.
I think that really, as we've specified in the previous show, I think it's the clerics, the real problem, and it's the ulama, the clerical caste of Islam who are inherently conservative and who are the ones pressuring Muslims and dominating Muslim communities and holding them back from being able to achieve their own personal Islam. And I think that itself also ties into, I think, what is the real primary problem with Islamism, and that is Saudi Arabia and Saudi petrodollars, Saudi money, Saudi media. I mean, in all across the Islamic world and in Muslim immigrant communities in Europe, you've got Saudi books, Saudi media, Saudi funded news stations, Saudi funded television channels, Saudi funded schools, Saudi funded clerics. Like it's everywhere. The insidious influence of Wahhabism, funded by literally billions of petrodollars, I think is the main problem behind Islamism. And I think if we cut that Saudi influence, if we were able to, I guess if we got off oil, really, then the Saudis would be, and the Wahhabis would be deprived of their resources, of their funding, and I think that would really go some way to stop the spread of extremism amongst Muslims.
I mean, I think that, this is a political problem. I think that the fact that the Islamic Republic of Iran was brought to power on the guise of it being on the backs of a people's revolution, popularized it and gave it a sort of legitimacy as a resistance movement against imperialism and so on and so forth. And I think that sort of challenging and getting rid of Islamism in, let's say, a country like Iran via a people's revolution will have a lot to do in helping to bring the political movement on its knees, in a sense. And I think that sort of resistance taking place in Iran, people, secularists, and people who have been out on the streets and in squares and in the Arab Spring, supporting them is really crucial. One of the things I find interesting is how, this whole Islamic, it's called an Islamic world, Islamic communities, and it's all seen as a homogeneous thing. And I think one of the good things about things like the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain or One Law for All, what they do is show that it's not the case. It's not one homogeneous group. There are a lot of differences of opinion within that group, and the more visibility we get, I think more people can join us and more people can take sides. I think today what's missing is people standing up and taking sides, really, and we need that, siding with people, not with Islamism. And I think that will be very key in how things play out. The support and solidarity is movements within the region, as is now quite clear for people who didn't believe it maybe 10 years ago, What is missing, though, I think still is that international solidarity. And, some of the things that was mentioned before about, my enemy's not my friend, post-colonial guilt, being considered racist to criticize Islam and Islamism, all of this are preventing people from defending people against Islamism. And hopefully that can change quickly, because time is running out and we have a lot to do if we're going to be able to push back this movement.
Everybody, a last word, and then we're going to wrap the show up. I'd like to thank everyone for showing up, the guests, the callers, and of course the panel, and our special guest, Maryam. We didn't have any Muslim callers today. This was the only show we've had that didn't have any Muslim callers. If you know any Muslims, either in real life or over the net, by all means encourage them to come on. Let them show them the other episodes of the show so that they can see that we're not just going to beat up on them with baseball bats or something like that. We don't lure people on to get beaten up by the panel. So they can come on, and of course, like all of the other guests, they can address the topic at hand or bring up a topic of their own. So we'll go Hassan, Kling, and then Maryam, and then we're done.
Okay, well, I'll just follow on from what you just said, Atheismo. We would love to have more Muslim callers. I personally have a lot of Muslim family. I have nothing against Muslims. In fact, I feel that what we're doing is actually helping those ordinary Muslims who really want to live their lives according to the humanity which I know majority of them want to live by.
Oh, I'm next, am I? I just want to do a recap on the thing of why. I'll keep it brief. Food for thought for the viewers. Why Western women are converting to Islam. Maryam said that they're joining a political movement. Atheismo suggests rebellion. Hassan says marriage. And the position that me and the Rationalizer take is that humans build a false dichotomy in that, for example, creationists is the most famous example, where they say that if evolution is false, therefore creationism is true. So people build these false dichotomies, and so with these women, they perceive, through their ignorance of female sexuality, they perceive that in the West, oh yes, women are all purely sexual objects, la-di-da-di-da, and so they switch straight into a counter-opposed worldview that they perceive gives them respect, and that is Islam. So through the false dichotomy, they zoom over to a counter-opposed counterculture. Okay, that was our position. Okay, thanks everyone.
Well, I think actually Islam sexualizes women and girls. I mean, from 9 years old.
No, I agree.
Yeah, I'm just giving my final thoughts. I know you agree with me, but I'm just, so it sexualizes them, a little bit of your hair causes fitna and chaos in society. The Saudi police have recently said even tempting eyes need to be covered up, and so on and so forth. So, in fact, it sexualizes people, from girl children. So it isn't a way out. It's actually just going into more misogyny. I think my final words would be that I think one of the things I've noticed a lot in the atheist community is the use of the term Muslims. And I think when discussing Islamism, and I think it's important to make a distinction between Muslims and Islamists. In the same way that we will call the English Defence Leaguers far right, we won't say the British or the working class or Christians. We refer to them as a political movement because they are a political movement with a specific political agenda. I think it's important to make a distinction between Muslims and Islamists. Muslims are, or those labeled as such, are the first victims of Islamism, and they are at the forefront of resisting it. And the clearer a distinction we make, the easier it is for us to be able to work with Muslims, because we are allies. We are allies in the fight against Islamism. And so I think that's important. The other is to think about the fact that how interesting it is that we see Muslims as one and the same as Islamists, and isn't there a racism in that to some extent, where Muslim is equated with a terrorist and a reactionary, and I think we especially have a responsibility to show the dissent and the opposition, and to work with the dissenters and opponents, and there are a lot of them out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Maryam.
Yeah, I'd like to say with a final word, both Maryam and Hassan mentioned this, that they still have many family members that are still theists and still religious, and I'll try not to get too emotional about this, but I'm basically like the only atheist in my entire extended family, and to think that all my family members will be burning in atheist hell forever unless they deconvert. Cut the broadcast. Cut the goddamn broadcast. DVR, cut the goddamn.
You're so funny.
You bastard.